Welcome back. You're still watching Citizen Extra, the Monday edition with me, Fred Indimuli. We continue discussing election preparedness, and let's now go all the way to the lakeside city of Kisumu. Our reporter Laura Otieno is on standby there to update us on the happenings from there. Very good morning to you, Laura. What can you tell us from Kisumu this morning?
Yes, thank you very much, Fred Indimuli, back at the Communication Center. And here in the county of Kisumu, actually, the political drumbeats are already sounding, and the residents are actually aligning themselves to the same. They're trying to actually dance to the tune on matters election preparedness. And maybe if I could talk to some of them here to tell me how prepared are they for the election. Sir, could you come over here and tell me, do you believe IEBC has done enough in terms of voter education ahead of the elections?
Hello, mimi naitwa David Moi, mkaji wa Kisumu. Kuhusu IEBC, hatujakuwa na msimamo kweli vile wanaendesha. Tujajua ukweli wao, wajatupa bayani kabisa vile kama wako ready kweli kwa ujapuzi. Na chenye tunaomba mheshimiwa Kibuitu, tunaomba mheshimiwa Kebukachi, tunaomba ya kwamba tafadhali hii election ikuwe election ya ukweli, niwe election ambao kweli wa Kenya wameelewa na wajue kweli tunataka ukweli, asikuwe kama Kibuitu ile wakati. Tafadhali tunaomba mheshimiwa, hii kura usimamie ukweli kabisa, wa Kenya wapate ukweli wao.
Asante. Hebu njoo hapa na utueleze, as a voter, unajua ile process ambayo utafuata wakati unaenda kupiga kura?
Mimi najua vile nitafuata. Nishajielimisha kwa, nimeona wakielimisha kwa TV, kwa magazeti, so nishajua. So sina shida yote, najua.
Na kuhusiana na the political atmosphere, tafadhali, the local politics, hebu njoo hapa utueleze, unadhani hali iko vipi? Wamekampeni ya kutosha?
Okay, upande ya campaign naweza sema iko sawa kwa sababu both parties wamekampeni. So naona wakati wa kupiga kura watu watatokelezea na wapige kura. Yeah.
Those are some of the opinions of the people here. Of course, they say they're confident in terms of voter education, in terms of the campaigns put forward by some of the candidates here. And of course, all they're waiting for is the day they'll be casting their vote, which is now known by many as Nane Nane. And of course, we will be here to be bringing you the latest if anything happens. Back to you, Fred.
Thank you, Laura. Of course, Nane Nane is only 7 days away. We're also waiting here, and that's exactly what we're discussing in studio. Thank you so much, Laura, for that update. We'll be linking up with Laura in a short while as well for more updates from the lakeside city of Kisumu. In studio, my panel just grew bigger. John Kagushia and George Osewe have now been joined by Eric Wanjohi, Michael Agwanda. Yes, good morning, gentlemen. Karibuni sana.
Good morning.
We continue discussing election preparedness. In the first hour, we're discussing the issue of this missing senior ICT manager from the IEBC and what it means, the kind of implications it has and as far as election preparedness. Remember, the IEBC today is actually conducting a test on its results transmission system, and Chris Musando, the gentleman who is still missing, was going to be a very huge part of that. In this next hour, I want to discuss the issue of ballot papers and the first batch of the presidential ballot papers printed by Al Ghurair Farm in Dubai arrive in Kenya today. But even before that happens, a section of political players are up in arms accusing the IEBC of printing 1.2 million more ballot papers than required. Third Way Alliance presidential candidate Ekuru Aukot reads malice in this. IEBC, however, maintains that the excess ballot papers are a normal occurrence in any such process, should this really be a cause for concern. Quick thoughts, Michael Agwanda, why should we really be questioning the number of ballot papers printed and 1.2 million? Because the IEBC has come out and explained, yes, they're printing them in booklets. Some of them you have to round off to the number just to fill up the booklet. Is there a way to print exact number of ballot papers?
Thank you, Fred. Indeed, 1.2 million ballot papers have been printed, and in excess of the numbers of voters that are out there. I think this, first thing I want to thank IBC for coming out very clearly to say that we have extra ballot papers. But I think they needed to go way beyond that and explain to us how they're going to handle the 1.2 million extra ballot papers. I will have this issue could be very complicated when you have 1.2 million ballot papers and nobody is telling you where they will be and specifically what the numbers are, perhaps in every polling station, and how the returning officer is going to handle those very 1.2 million extra ballot papers. In last general election, if I may refer you back, Uhuru Kenyatta won with about 8,000 votes. And so if 8,000 votes is enough to enable one to become the president, just a little bit above his opponents, 1.2 million papers will actually be beyond what you could even imagine. It could literally, if, for example, it lands into a wrong hand, then we will go back into what we've had for many, many years, that ballot papers have been stuffed into ballot boxes for one reason or the other, perhaps through the highest bidder. And politicians are very cunning. In many cases, politicians want to win by crook or whatever you want to call it. And if it means even buying some of these ballot papers, they will. But now, IBC need to come out and say, look, we have this extra ballot papers, but this is how we'll handle them. We'll ensure that the presiding officer knows about the number of ballot paper in every polling station. We'll ensure that the agents knows and take note of these ballot papers. I will ensure that these ballot papers, extra ballot papers, are actually declared by the end of the day. Otherwise, we will be running into a situation where basically these ballot papers will find themselves in the wrong hand, and that will definitely polarize the election that we're going to have. Remember, as somebody has always said, that this election is all about perception. If we perceive it to be inclined to some negative forces, then we'll be very worried about it. But if we perceive it to be free, fair and credible election, then we will not be worried about it. And so IBC, as we've always said before, come out clearly and tell us how you're going to manage this 1.2 million extra ballot papers.
Eric Wanjohi, 1.2 million ballot papers is about 6-something% of the total number of ballot papers that you're going to use in this election. Surely that is enough to tilt the scales either way if at all someone decides to use them in ways that are not supposed that they are not supposed to be used. Don't you think that 1.2 million extra ballot papers is actually a number that's a bit too high?
Fred, IBC has always had a communication problem. Some of this information should not even be coming from Third Way Alliance. It should be coming from IBC itself. If you are to look at, for instance, the mortality rate versus the voter registration process, you'll understand that you expect that between when the voter registration process ended till now, there are some people who will die, meaning that they may not be able to participate in the election, and there are some people who will be born, meaning that they still cannot be able to be registered. So when you have 1.2 million ballots extra, we need to understand, are these ballots that are projected to buffer a runoff, just in case there's a runoff, or what exactly is the purpose of 1.2 million? Because we'll expect that there may be less voters in these general elections, if we are to talk about the mortality rates, than what had already been registered.
Okay, and of course, some part of the explanation given by IEBC is that some of these extra ballot papers are supposed to cover for when a voter makes a mistake on their ballot paper, they can get an extra one. But Bwana Jojo Sewe, do you agree with that explanation? Is it satisfactory to you?
Well, I just have to add on 1 or 2 points. This is the problem when IBC do not involve political parties in sourcing out the presidential ballot papers or any other papers for that matter. They single-sourced the presidential election materials. And what does this bring us to? It brings us to this mess. There's what we call acknowledgement, but there's also what we call enabling. So we should not even get into this place in the first place if the process is transparent. So this shows us that what mess we are looking at. And as my colleague says, they need to address that exhaustively. They need to come out and tell us, okay guys, this is what we have and we put it down here. And they need to do a thorough audit in that respect. If they tell us the ballot papers are arriving here on Friday, tomorrow, they have to tell us and actually institute an investigation why those 1.2 million ballot papers were printed. There's no question about that, because to us that's designed to create room for somebody or for other people to cling on to power. So this is the kind of things that we talk about that actually bring violence. This is what brings what we call uncertainty, even to the economy itself. Now the whole world is standstill watching Kenyan elections. People should watch elections as the economy grows, not as it deteriorates. And of course, I'm going to delve into the economy, whereby this is part of the corruption that is eating this society and our youth in and out, and needs to be addressed fully.
Yes.
Where are our leaders? Where are the opinion shapers? And they're mum about this. For instance, the guy from Kisumu just articulated very well what they want. That is every citizen's wish, to have a peaceful election. And what do a peaceful election means? Peaceful election means that IBC comes out clearly to ascertain and assure people that there be no monkey business around voting, even after voting. So once that is done, it will be great. Now, there's an article yesterday that I was reading that Army was drilling in Kisumu, doing drills in Kisumu. Army is to protect the borders, not drill to its citizens and intimidate them. Why Kisumu? I mean, the guy in Kisumu has spoken very well, all what they want. But now they are performing drills in Kisumu. I mean, you don't do that. Okay. Why would you take Kisumu and start drilling there in Kisumu? What are you telling the rest of the citizens?
Okay.
I think we are in the era of fake news. So we need to be very careful that we don't fall prey to the fake news. There's a lot of fake news around.
George, now, on the issue of ballot papers, because there have been claims, and even before the papers were printed, one of NASA's complaints about Al-Ghurair was, they say that they claimed that, yes, Al-Ghurair was going to print more papers, ballot papers, than necessary. And you remember the claim by Cord back in 2013 that there were 2 million extra votes. This is a claim. That went to the president, but not to the other seats. Surely, 1.2 million votes, the IEBC had indicated they could have a buffer of about 1% of the votes. But 1.2 million is definitely more than that. This is about 6%. Don't you think that this is a bit too much?
You know, Fred, Al-Ghurair wouldn't print without instructions from IEBC. So the people who gave the instructions on what is to be printed is IEBC. And that is why we call upon IEBC to explain clearly what it is. And IBC talked of 1%. So if the percentage exceeds 1%, they also need to come out clearly to explain how their 1% was calculated versus what we are calculating to be 6-point-something%. And they have no option other than to just explain to Kenyans how that came to be and how that will happen.
Do you, for example, understand any need they may have of so many extra ballot papers?
You know, I would say in the first place the issue of excess ballot papers, to me, whether they have been printed more, to me, to some extent, I do not think it accounts much, because, Fred, you remember last time in the election we had in 2013, we had 86% of Kenyans voting. Now, if we were to have a repeat of the same, it means then that we would have 86% of 19 million Kenyans voting, and that in itself leaves us with an excess of 2.6 million ballot papers. And so if we are talking about excess ballot papers, it starts from there. We already have excess, and of course we have printed another excess of 1.2. So personally, I do not think we needed to print 1.2. That to me would actually appear too much. And as Michael said here, we need them to explain to us this 1.2. Where will they go to, and which areas will go to? And what I think is important is because we also have a control measure whereby we are going to have a reconciliation of the ballots that are going to be cast versus what remains. And that reconciliation is very, very important for credibility of this election. And I believe that if we can be able to handle that issue of reconciliation in the right way, it is going to help us as Kenyans then to understand that what was cast actually is what was tallied, is what was counted and tallied. And Mr. Aukot, when they went to the Al-Ghurair farm, I'm a bit surprised that he seemed to be so helpless and seems to come and ask questions in Kenya, and would have expected him to do a little bit more than what he's talking about, and the helplessness that he now seems to have. For example, I would have expected them to go and sample and get to the stack, look at the stack where those ballot papers are stacked, and get to the bottom of that stack and ask for cartons which have already been packed, and get to count and see exactly what it is, even do some mathematics there. I think it would have been very important for them to do a little bit more, so that they went there as stakeholders to participate in an exercise that is supposed to bolster our confidence in this whole exercise. And now when they don't seem to have also done a thorough job, that also leaves us with a lot to be desired. And I dare say, we, and the way things are now coming out, we should have a credible election come 8th based on all the systems that have been put in place, without having to speak really for IBC.
Fred, is a statement that you've made that must be corrected.
Yes, Eric.
When you talk about some of these ballot boxes being used, ballot papers being used to correct mistakes that have already been made, we need to understand that in this country we have a voting process that involves one man or woman, one vote, which means that every person will be given one ballot paper. And when you're given that ballot paper, you use a method called secret ballot to vote for whoever it is that you wish to vote for. How will IEBC identify the ones that have errors and the ones that don't have errors? And again, do you want to tell me that the errors will only be on the presidential ballots? Well, we need to be a bit realistic here.
That's the explanation given by IEBC, that if a voter damages for any reason
their ballot,
vote, then they can ask for a different one. I don't know.
How do you determine a spoiled vote? Not a spoiled vote. Into the ballot.
Not a spoiled vote.
No, I think
it only becomes a vote after you cast it into the ballot box. But if you damage the paper before you cast the ballot, probably then you can return that and be given a different one. That is the explanation.
It's true, and you have a right as a voter.
That is not convincing, because that is where you'll get all these mechanisms of rigging put in place. Because it means that these extra papers that somebody has spoiled can actually be used again.
Not really.
As an excuse of dumping votes into the ballot box.
I think, Fred, once you damage or once you have spoiled a vote, and of course, as per the law, you have a right to ask, and this is important for the voter's education again. As a voter, you have a right to ask for a vote up to 3 times, after which then you cannot be given another vote. And once you spoil a vote, it is clearly
ballot.
The ballot. That is, it's true. A ballot. It is clearly shown to all the agents that it is spoiled, and then it is put aside, and at the end of the day is accounted for. And from what I've seen from their voter education is that when you go to vote, you will be given 6 ballot papers. You cannot say that, for example, I'm only going to vote for 5 candidates, I don't want to vote for the 6th, and then you are not given. You must be given all of them. Then when you go to the decision box where you are supposed to mark them, it is up to you now to decide, are you going to mark all of them, or are you not going to mark any of them? And that is important again for the accounting of the votes, and at the end of the day when you have done the tallying. And again, the assertion that there were 2 million votes that were cast for the president in 2013 as opposed to the other candidates. Again, of course, you know, when the facts are checked, it is not true. You know, that one is just a propaganda that is usually sustained for certain political reasons, because we know very well that the highest difference between votes cast between the president and the MCAs was 164,000 votes, and then the smallest difference was between votes cast for governors and votes cast for the presidential candidate, which were 33,000 votes. That you can verify from credible sources. I mean, that is the IBC vote tallied in 2013. So really, and that has been that has been shown even by the media itself. They have clearly indicated, even in the Daily Nation, that we do not have 2 million extra votes cast for the president. I don't think really that is true.
Let me bring Michael Agwane into this conversation. You know, we ran the risk of let me jump in real quick. Mike, of course, John Kawishi has just mentioned something very important, and that has to do with voter education. 7 days to the elections, probably that is where we should be focusing our energies, because yes, he mentioned something that even on the issue of damaged votes, a voter has a right to ask for a replacement up to 3 times. These are things that people do not know, don't you think?
Correct. Delving into the issue of the ballot papers, one-on-one, when you have 1.2 million ballot papers extra, that amounts to a lot. And I want to correct one of my panelists, that may not be amounting to so much. that really amounts to a lot. And when you go out there and you know that IBC is also saying that we're only projecting 1% of extra ballot papers, and now we have about over 6% extra. The question that everybody needs to be asking themselves is who is paying for the rest of 5% that were printed, and who allowed them? And the question I will also ask is, were the political divides from both the government and the opposition involved in making that decision? Who made that decision? Was it Al Ghurair or not? It is in record when Al Ghurair is saying that actually this is the biggest job they've ever done from Kenya, not from all the jobs they've ever done. In fact, they're saying that one of the biggest companies in the Middle East, but this is the biggest job they've ever done. The question is, are they giving us another 5% of ballot papers pro bono, or is the government paying for it, and to whose interest? Now look here, I want to remind my brother John that if you remember the issue of Tharaka-Nithi many years back, these are the places that were not announced until the last minute, and people voted overwhelmingly over 100%. How people resurrected, how people are registered on the very day and decided to vote. Still nobody has been told how they did it, but that happens. Why? Because there were availability of extra ballot papers. Now if we want a free, fair and credible election, the issue of ballot paper, as my colleagues have said, must be addressed, and addressed to the satisfaction of the Kenyan electorate who will be accessing these things. Remember that politicians and those shrewd ones that have a lot of money have always accessed these extra ballot papers and used them for their benefit. Do we want to elect people by one vote, one man, or do we want to elect people that are able to access this ballot paper? On the issue of the training on electioneering process, you know, I wonder why Kenya, we always want to do things at the last minute. Now this is the last week and IBC saying, oh, we need to do electoral training on how to vote and how to do. What have they been doing for the last 4.5 years? And if you look at this, is it just a scheme to enable people not to have the right information at the right time and to be reminded over and over again what they're supposed to do? Let me tell you, the majority of our voters in this country are actually literate, and they will be helped by the very people we call agents, that some of them will not be directing them to do the right thing. And so the question of extra ballot papers, regardless of whether if one ballot paper is spoiled, they can ask for another one and ask for another until the third time, is who knows how much ballot papers is going to Western extra? Okay. Who knows how much extra ballot papers is going to Northeastern, and who is in custody of this, and how will they be regulated so that it doesn't go into the wrong hand to help rig election?
Gentlemen, we do have the presidential candidate for the Third Way Alliance on phone. That's Ekuru Okot. Mr. Okot, good morning.
Good morning, Fred. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you. You have been quoted in the dailies as being the first person to raise this issue about the extra ballot papers printed. What exactly is your issue with this?
No, I think my issue is basically this. Number one, I understand IEBC is complying with the regulations that require that they print 1% extra ballot papers. But there is really no a cogent and believable explanation how the extra ballot papers are used. But be that as it may, if you look at the figure that has finally been revealed to us, it's actually more than 1%. It comes to 6.15%. Because 1% of 19.6 million voters should be 196,000.
Yes.
But from the figures we know so far, and this is what my agent established in Dubai, we are talking 6.1%, which is 1.2 million votes. Ballots out there. Now, we are yet to really understand the clear explanation why these extra ballot papers. And I also want us to look at this in the context of possible election offenses. You know, one of them is actually ballot stuffing. And this is not anything new, unique to Kenya. And so when you have extra ballot papers out there, you need to look at it against that possibility of ballot stuffing. And this has happened in the past, it's happening elsewhere, And it's okay. I think it's right for us to raise an alarm that when you have got extra ballot papers out there, 1.2 million,
yes,
it's a reason for anybody to worry, because then, like one of your panelists is saying, if IEBC had done civic education continuously for the last 4 years, then we should not be worried about spoiled paper, ballot papers or something. We are giving people excuse, and then and this is why we have asked that our agents supervise, be present during the printing, because already suspicion is out there.
Bwana Aukot, our assumption is that by you having your agents all the way in Dubai to check the printing process, that probably they would have gotten an explanation from that end of why there was need to print this many ballot papers. Did you get any such explanation?
Fred, if you look at the two reports, that I published on Friday, I did release an interim report in which we addressed all those concerns. Remember, my agent arrived into Dubai on the 27th when it was confirmed to them that 95% of all the ballot papers had already been printed.
Yes.
This was confirmed by Al Ghurair. It was also confirmed by the commissioners present, Dr. Kombe and Kurgat themselves. So, and we were not given explanation. And remember, we had given a 5-point proposal to IEBC on how to remove the suspicion. Again, this was never confirmed to us. So I waited for the completion of the exercise. And what my agent basically did was to ask them, can we then do a random search, inspection of what you've already printed out? I mean, remember, because of the exigencies of time, they were not able to even complete that exercise. So the truth for the matter, and we still stand by my agent's report, that 95% of the ballot had already been printed by the time they arrived there. Therein already lies mischief. If the idea was invite this due diligence team to come and be satisfied, our purpose was not to go and look at the impressive technology of Al Ghurair, but we was able to make sure that this exercise, I mean, out of invitation from IEBC itself, it should be above board. Otherwise, there was no point of me sending my agent to Dubai.
Finally, have you raised this matter formally with the IEBC?
I did write, in fact, on just more than one occasion. On the 10th of July, Kenyans will remember that IEBC invited us as stakeholders after the High Court decision. I did table this proposal to IEBC. IEBC is yet to come out clean and say, Ekuru, we have taken into account your proposal. Remember, it's only Third Way Alliance that actually has tried to help IEBC, secure confidence with the Kenyans. I've not seen any proposal from NASA, no proposal from Jubilee. It is just political contestation. I have also written to Chiloba and to Chebukati formally and tabled this proposal to them. I told them these are the fears we have. If you could comply with this, I think we'll have a fair and credible election. Right now, they have to deal with the suspicion that they have not done the printing of these ballot papers above board.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ekuru Aukot, presidential candidate, Third Way Alliance. Thank you so much for your feedback there. John Kagusha, you want to say something?
Yeah, I'd like to ask him if those ballot papers that are excess are only for presidential ballot papers, or are they also for the other, are they part of the other
part of the other
levels?
Do we still have Ekuru Aukot on phone?
I am still online, Fred.
Did you hear that question by John Kagusha?
Yes, I
whether or not this
Kagusha, that's a very important question you raised, and it's a question that I also actually wanted explanation on.
Yeah.
Because remember, my assumption therefore is this too, that the 1.2 million is either spread across all the 6 elections, but because the subject matter of our visitation in Dubai was about the presidential ballot paper, then the other assumption is that the 1.2 million relates to the presidential ballot paper. And this explanation was never given to us clearly by IEBC. It is still very hazy, so we do not know.
Okay, so it could actually be the excess 1% printed out for all the electoral contests.
We cannot. My guess is as good as yours, Fred, because we tried to seek this explanation from IEBC. IEBC has not clearly said this 1.2 million, is it across the 6th election or is only for the presidential? But because we were invited to supervise the presidential ballot paper printing, I can only say it relates to the presidential, and that is a worry for any candidate going into this election.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Ekuru Aukot, a presidential candidate on a third way alliance ticket. Gentlemen, of course, you've heard what Bonekuro Okot says. Also a question of communication again from the IEBC. Yes, you've taken people to go and observe the printing all the way in Dubai, but there's still no clarity. People are coming back from Dubai even more confused than when they went there. John Kagusha, what exactly is the problem here?
You know why I'm asking him whether the 1.2 is only for the presidential candidate is because it would be absurd that only the presidential candidate or candidates would get excess ballot papers printed. Because my imagination would be that they have printed an excess for the MCA, for the women rep, and for all the other positions that we have.
And if that is the case, then it makes sense, because 1.2 divided by 6 different levels of electoral races, then to make maybe 200,000 extra votes, extra ballot papers for each particular level, which is about the 1% that the IEBC had indicated.
Yeah, and I wish maybe in this session again we can also have a call from maybe Kwamboka, IEBC also. They need to clarify really whether that is the case, because that's why we are saying we could be having discussions based on misinformation because we are not again getting enough information from IEBC.
I will ask my director to see if we can get any IEBC commissioner on phone, and if we can be able to do that, then we'll try and get a clarification from them. But even without calling them directly from studio, surely, gentlemen, there's a problem with communication, and an issue like this is raised by a presidential candidate. Should the IEBC really wait until more questions are asked by the media before they can respond to this? George Osere?
Yeah, first of all, actually, this is the perception that gives the IEBC a bad name. And this is what people carry with them. Al-Ghurair sourcing out, it's a single sourcing out of presidential ballot papers by Al-Ghurair. And it's the information is there in public. You saw them taking the picture with the president, and I don't think that's fake news. And then you saw them taking the picture of the president in Dubai. I mean, come on now. If we continue this trend, and then the joke is that it's only presidential candidates' votes that get spoiled. Other votes are just okay. And if I go back to my friend here, I talked about 2013. IEBC must tell us in how many presidential candidates are, how many presidential votes are casted in every and single constituency from ward level to all the way to constituency level. He talks about 2013 was just kind of a perception, or it was not true. 2013, the then commissioner, Mr. Mohammed, really didn't give us a tally. He actually passed the deadline, because when he was trying to give this tally, nothing was adding up. So I don't think what he's saying is true in that 2013. And two, if we get back now to this 1.2, and like I said, the story is out there. It's not me making it up. It is something that is out there. So this is causing anxiety. In one of the campaign
it's important to be truthful.
In one of the let me finish. In one of the campaign trails, a fine Kenyan man from Kakamega who has raised 4 kids. 3 of them have finished college. Of course, they're all in the house because of unemployment and because of corruption. So at this point, this guy came to me and asked me, will my votes count? I assured him, please go vote, because people are getting exhausted if their votes don't count. So I told him, go and vote so that your kids can get some jobs. It has brought the cost of business high, companies are shutting down, and everything. So because of this incompetence of IEBC, if we have good leaders, and IEBC does what it's supposed to do, we need to make them understand this is an institution that does not belong to them, but belongs to us as well.
You know, because George has really touched on some of the issues I have said. First of all, the commissioner, the chairman of the commission was not Mohammed. It was Isaac Hassan, Bwana George. And again, the issue of tallying was not a problem in 2013. Maybe what you are referring to is what had been raised by Kriegler in 2007.
No.
And in 2013 we had the proper tallying. And again you have once and again referred to the issue of single sourcing of Al-Ghurair. And I think that is an issue which has been settled by the court, by the judiciary. And you remember the allegations that there was a connection between the First family and Al-Ghurair is something that was dismissed from the High Court, which was even seen to be friendly to NASA at that time. They dismissed and said NASA could not prove any closeness or any relation between Al Ghurair and the first family in Kenya, something again which was also upheld by the Court of Appeal. So the issue of conflict of interest does not arise whatsoever, and that is an issue really has divided this country so much. It was settled by the two courts of law, and I think it's an issue that has been settled, and we don't really need to keep going back to that. I think what we need to do is to focus ahead. Like now we are discussing this issue of the 1.2 million votes, which is very important to this country, and we want it clarified so that then we know the way forward, so that we, as we are saying, all of us, we want a credible election, we want transparency, we want openness, and that is why we are demanding IEBC need to come out clean and explain what is the position.
Eric Wanjohi, do you think that the 1.2 million extra ballot papers, even if for all the electoral races, including MCA up to the presidential level, don't you think it's still a high number?
Fred, it comes out to be a very high number. Again, I talk about communication from IEBC. When you look at somebody like Dr. Okot, Dr. Okot is a presidential candidate. The burden of proof of his statements should not even come from him. It should come from IEBC, the people who have been accused or the people who are actually running the elections. What are they doing about it? They are quiet. They are silent about it. This is the kind of atmosphere that is being created in the country that's causing a lot of anxiety, whereby there are observations that are being made, and observations are raised with IEBC. IEBC does not address them, at least publicly, to calm down the anxiety that is being created from some of these observations. It is the right of any candidate, presidential or otherwise, to raise all these observations so as to ensure that the elections are credible. And IEBC owes it to the entire nation to respond to all these concerns that are being raised, because all these people that are raising these concerns have their voters, have their support base. And we all want to make sure that IEBC has really dealt with these situations in a very credible and transparent manner that will be able now to certify that you're going to have credible and free elections. When they keep quiet about it, it leaves room for all sorts of principles and theories to come into the foyer.
Do you think
but I want to correct my brother here who touched on 2013 general elections. And I just point out that I don't know whether he's aware, but the presidential elections were actually contested at the Supreme Court. So saying that there was no issue with the counting process, I don't think he's very factual on that.
Yes.
Because if there was no issue, that means that everybody would have been so content with the results, and there wouldn't have been a contention thereafter. But that notwithstanding, this country has a history of ballot stuffing that everybody is really trying to guard against. Whether it's through the opposition efforts of guarding what do they call it? Adopt a poll.
Yeah.
Or it's through the government approach of trying to secure the polling station to ensure that there are no the levels of excitement are contained. We need to make sure that this process is credible, and IEBC are the ones who can only come out to certify the credibility.
John, do you think we have sufficient voter education to counter some of these problems that could arise now that we have the 1.2 million extra ballot papers?
You know, we have voter education which has been carried out by IEBC, but I'm afraid to say that the misinformation which is coming also from interested parties and other stakeholders is also very, very alarming. Today in the morning I was looking at the social media, and one of the things I saw is someone giving directions on how the voting should be done. And of course, definitely when I read it, I could see it was quite misinforming. And you know, that kind of information is going to Kenyans in different places. So once again, IEBC need to be more louder, and you know, actually I say they need to be louder than the loudest political players in this case, so that then their message is clear. And I think they have already been doing a lot of voter education. By the way, for every constituency, they have deployed and these people have been there for the last 1 month. they have been on the ground for every constituency in Kenya. People who've been doing voter education, and it's a big group of people, and they have been going from one meeting to another, to churches and all that. I've seen them even demonstrate. I've been seeing even pictures on the social media of different areas where they are doing demonstration. But again, they also need to also go more to the public spheres, in the media, for example. I have seen them, of course, even here, I think I've seen them doing the demonstrations on how the election will be done. But that is still not enough, because we still have a lot of Kenyans who cannot view TVs, and they cannot listen to the radios, so they need to still go to them one-on-one in a bigger way. Of course, this ought to have been done for more than 4 years, not the last week or the last 1 month or the last quarter of the election. That may never be sufficient. So it is something that we need to do from time to time and throughout the whole process, so that as Kenyans, then we are better informed.
It's 7 days to the elections. Don't you think that probably even the politicians should come in at this time, because they stand to benefit the most with a more informed electorate, that you may mobilize or even 90% of your supporters to come out and vote, but if at all they're not well informed about the process, then that could affect your votes. Michael?
First of all, I want to say that it's been a number of times you've been giving to those guys. Don't forget me over here.
Don't worry, Michael.
Let me tell you, my friend Fred and the bully, the politicians are fatigued. If you're going to depend on them now to be able to train voters on how they need to vote, you're cheating yourself. First of all, the politicians have gone through so much in the last few months. The nominations were really a bad nomination from both aisles of the divides, and they spent a lot of money, and after they won the tickets to vie in their political parties, they were also issues of whether their names were at the IBC or not, and so they spent a lot of time trying to ascertain that. This is perhaps the only time in the history of Kenya where even people that got their certificates from the individual parties still had issues with their names at the IBC, and so they spent money, and then they had another long stretch after getting the nominations from a nomination certificate from their political party to where we are now. So we can't depend on them. And remember, the politicians, yes, they may be able to bring people out, but only if they have the resources. Are they having the resources to do that? Absolutely not. The person that has the resources to do that is IBC. And as John, my friend, has correctly said that they've started doing the voter education just about a month ago or something like that. And the question I had asked earlier is, why couldn't this process have begun way earlier? Was this a strategy so that people go there without knowing exactly what they're going to do, spoil more votes, or what is the strategy, or what was it that the commission at the IBC was waiting for until last minute for them to do voter education or civic education for the people, to know exactly what they're supposed to do? Remember, there's a lot that has taken place. We're going to use the KIMS, technology, machines to identify the voters and all this stuff. Some of these people that we're talking about, even putting their hands there is a problem. Some of them will come with their hands soiled, and so the fingerprints will not even. Have they been told that perhaps you need to wash your hands? Even if you come from your farm, you need to wash your hands so that your fingerprints can be detected by this. Look, there are small things, but if we don't put the spanner into the works, then we are lying to ourselves. But I want to remind my friend John again, when you say that the issue of the president not having any affiliation or contact with Al Gorai farm, while we saw the photos, whether they were true or right, I can tell you that it is a perception. Losing a court case does not necessarily mean that justice has been served. Justice served also need to be perceived to have been served in the right way. And so the perception, once it is created out that there are issues, then you need to know that perhaps the best person to have investigated this case was not the court, in my view, but was the DCI, because that's their job. NASA can only present what they can, but really NASA is not the DCI who has the power and the capability and the resources to be able to do this investigation. So when I look at hold on for a minute, when I look at the voter mobilization and the training, I am only seeing a situation where there is a delink from the reality of what IBC is supposed to do and what people are expecting out there. My advice to IBC is perhaps this thing needs not to be done at last minute. For your information, it is never done, because after the election, the only person you find in the constituency level is that guy called the returning officer or the constituency coordinator. That is all. And maybe a secretary.
Hence my question, don't you think politicians, or maybe political parties for that matter, do have a role to play in as far as voter education is concerned? Remember, back in 2013, there were more than 100,000 spoiled votes. These are votes that are ballots that were actually cast but never counted because they were spoiled. When George also, don't you think that that's a very high number, that we should be worried by the fact that most Kenyan voters are not really apt when it comes to the processes of voting?
Thank you again, Fred. Again, this is the incompetency of IEBC. Let's face it. You cannot, you're charged with an election of a country to elect leaders to steer the economy, to steer the society, and to steer the country towards development, so that our youths can get employment, so that our mothers can go to the maternity and get medicine without failed health system. But where do we end up? These votes, it is 1.2 million. If they accept it, 1.2 million, probably it's more. Okay? Why? Because the army commander came out in the open to acknowledge, saying that NASA's allegation of rigging the elections were true, absolutely true. They didn't come back to fight it back. So if that happens, then you and me, we know what they're up to. So as my colleague says, we need to tell IBC we still have a week, and you can still come out clean. We, as citizens of this country, wherever we reside, we deserve a clean election, a credible election, and the perception of rigging to be completely taken out of our environment. Okay. And that being said, I'll also come back to my colleague here, and I agree with John. If a court declares a ruling in favor of whoever, and especially this administration, we know that corruption has permeated this society, that even those judges probably are compromised. And there's a reason why they're doing this systematically. You can't come and tell me, because we don't have the confidence in courts either, that, oh well, the court has ruled this, so that has to stay the way the court has ruled. Again, we are going back to perception that I keep saying all the time. We cannot get into an election the way things are. We may question what the courts rule, but we still abide by the law, and what the courts rule is law. Eric Wanjohi, don't you think that we still run a risk of getting even more spoiled votes this time round, given that in 2013 there were more than 100,000? We have more voters this time round. No election preparedness in as far as training is concerned. Don't you think that that number will be higher?
Fred, thanks again. Yeah? I hold a difference of opinion with John on the matter of civic education, because when you listen to very many leaders, they themselves are not enlightened about what their role is, or even how to go about the entire voting process. So you can imagine, if they are going to train people on the ground, be it their voters or otherwise, what would they be training them on? So the civic education component of it, IEBC needs to really work on it. And not just IEBC. The government institutions have to work on it, IEBC have to work on it, and also us as private citizens, we also have a stake to play. We all need to go out there and educate citizens on A, their right to vote, B, their civic rights as Kenyans when it comes to matters elections. And that can only be picked, the cue can only be picked from IEBC, because IEBC should be the custodian of the curriculum, because they are the ones who are running the elections. However, I need to correct something that my brother George here has raised about the military. I think that whole issue about the military was blown out of context, and even when you are to look at the constitution itself, if you will allow me, Fred, just to read to you section 241, section 3 of the Constitution, and subsection C, where it says that the defense forces may be deployed to restore peace in any part of Kenya affected by unrest or instability with only the approval of the National Assembly. Which is true, and that is what the opposition is playing on. But we all know that this country is currently in a state of peace. You do not need to deploy anybody to go and restore peace anywhere. However, that was subsection C. In subsection B, it says, the defense forces shall assist and cooperate with other authorities in situations of emergency or disaster and report to the National Assembly whenever deployed in such circumstances. Okay. Which means, whereas in the previous subsection C, the option, I mean, there is an option whereby they may or may not be deployed. In subsection B, it says that it is part of their duty to cooperate and assist other authorities in situations of emergency and disaster. And all what the military probably is doing is cooperating with other security agencies to safeguard against where we've come from. That was the 2007. That when there are pockets of excitement, that the pockets of excitement do not raise to a level that is uncontrollable. Okay. So to me, that issue has been blown out of context, and there is certainly no foul play. Okay. With what our military is doing.
Well, it was the newspapers already. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Eric Wanjohi, George Osewe, John Kavusha, Michael Lagwana. Time now for another break. We might be back with some of the panelists for the next discussion in the next hour. Let's now take a break. Citizen Extra continues.